Welcome to your class on gaps. Now, I need you to pay attention to this section of price action right here. Notice how there is a space in the market. That space is called a gap. Now, let's get into more on gaps and how they form. Now, by now, you should understand the concept of how a candlestick forms. You should understand the concept of opens and closes and the shadows. Now, usually when your candlestick is forming or while the chart is creating itself, when a new candlestick forms after a candlestick closes, it usually opens on the same level as the previous candlestick's close. So this is a bullish candlestick. There is its open, that is its close. So the next candlestick should start forming and its open should be right next to the close of the previous candlestick. Now, in the case of a gap, what happens is price is moving so fast in one direction that it leaves a gap in the market. And that gap is when price jumps a few prices within a split second. So between the close and the new open, price has moved so much that it leaves a space in the market. And that's how gaps are formed. Now you try to figure out whether a gap is up or down by looking at the close of the previous candlestick. So the close of the candlestick that was before the gap and the open of the candlestick after the gap. Now, if the open is above the close, then we have gapped up. That is the direction of our gap. Now, gaps can be up or down, depending on where the open is in accordance to the close. So the close is your anchor point. If your open is above your close, then we have gapped up. If your open is below your close, then we have gapped down. So let me give you an example of a gap down. So there's our candlestick forming. And price would have moved so fast down that it would have left a space in the market. Now, how do we know whether this is a gap up or down? Again, we look at the close of the previous candlestick before the gap and the open of the candlestick after the gap. So here's our previous candlestick. Our close is down here. And our open is up here. So in this case, our open is below our close. So we have gapped down. Now that we've figured out what direction we have gapped, the rule with gaps is if a gap happens and it is a gap up, price must come down to close that gap. Now, a gap is only closed once price reaches the same price as the close of the candlestick that was before the gap. So once price reaches this point, this gap has officially been closed. Now, again, with this gap down, if we have gap down, then price must come up to close our gap. Now, this is the rule with gaps. The gap must always close. But generally, when we have rules in the market, they don't tend to work out as well as the rules intend them to. So you want to kind of look at your currency pair and make sure that that currency pair closes its gaps. But let's look at this on a more practical level. So here is our gap. Let's try to figure out where exactly our gap is. So we first want to find the close of the candlestick before the gap. So this is our candlestick before the gap. So it is a bullish candlestick. So our close is on top. So our gap is from there to the open of the candlestick after the gap. So this is the candlestick before the gap. This is the candlestick after the gap. So we're looking for the open. Now this is a bearish candlestick, so our open would be on top. So our gap would be in this area right here. This is where our gap is. So we know that our gap has closed when price comes all the way back up and touches the close of the candlestick that was before the gap. So as you can see, price just about touched the close and then started moving down again with the next candlestick. Let's look for more examples. Now there are tons of gaps in all the different currency pairs. And they're fairly easy to spot because, well, it's obvious that there's a space in the market, so you will see the gap. Oh, there we go. Now, do not pay any attention to the actual colors of the candlesticks. Do not pay attention to the shadows when you are still trying to figure out where your gap is. So from here, we're going to figure out where the close of the candlestick of the gap, the close of the candlestick before the gap. So this is a bearish candlestick, so our close is at the bottom. And the open of the candlestick after the gap. So our open is down here. Wow, that's a big gap. So our gap is between the close of the candlestick before the gap and the open of the candlestick after the gap. So now we've got a bearish candlestick before the gap. So our close is at the bottom. And we have got a bullish candlestick after the gap, so our open is at the top. So the distance between our gap, well, our open and close, is this space in between here. So we know that price after it gapped had to come all the way to the top here and touch this price right here in order to close this gap. And as you can see, that has been done. Now how you trade your gap is, it's either you're going to place your pending order because you know that, this is a gap down because obviously there is our close and our open is below our close. So it's a gap down. So price must come up to close the gap. So in this case, when we see this gap, we want to buy. So in this case, we wouldn't have much time to actually place a pending order. So in this instance, we just simply buy. So this would be our buy trade. Hopefully we'd catch it as early as that. And we'd want to set a take profit. Now your take profit must be just below the gap to give room for the spread. Now we'll get into spread and all of that once you've completed all the different patterns because it's a part of your strategy creation. But for now, just know that you should set all your pending orders slightly below your target to accommodate the spread. So you want to kind of just check that on Euro CHF. Our spread is 42, so we want to make sure that the distance between here is 42. Okay, so that is the one way to trade a gap. But if we were looking at a gap on the hourly chart, because there's two ways in which gaps can form. Gaps can form because of price moving really fast in one direction, or they can form over the weekend. So let's scroll back and see if we can find any gaps on this currency pair on the 1 hour time frame, because those generally would be our weekend gaps. So let's scroll back and look out for them. Well, over here we have got a gap. Can you see that there is a space in the market? Now notice that there are shadows here, but because our open and our close is not on the same level, we know that that is a gap. So what we want to do is, here is our candlestick before the gap, so we just want to find its close. So this is a bullish candlestick, so our close will be on top over here. Let's make that a nice solid line. And then we want to look for the open of the candlestick after the gap. So this is the distance of our gap. So it's from the open, it must go all the way up to the close. Now let's look at how long it actually took to close the gap completely. So we're going to go across and just go to the next candlestick. So it took about 5 hours, about 5 or 6 hours to close our gap completely. Now you don't want to be in the market for that long. And besides, this gap only actually formed at midnight. So I don't think you want to be waiting until from midnight to 6 a.m. in order for your gap to close. So one way in which you could actually trade this would be, you could have set a pending order. Let's just say you had found it and it was down here already and you wanted to go to bid. Okay, so you would set a pending order. So obviously it would be a buy pending order because this is a gap up, and a take profit. So you take profit again, 42 points below our target. So 42 points would be, wow, so we don't get that much profit now, do we? Okay, so this is a currency pair with a very high spread, so let's just accommodate it. Now obviously the currency pair has a high spread over the weekend. So you want to just accommodate for whatever the spread is then. So you basically will take your profit once price reaches that point. So you can either decide to do an instant execution at the bottom here, outside. Once it was at the bottom down there, you could have also decided to do an instant execution, meaning that you just buy at that point and hold on to your trade until it closes your gap. Remember, once it closes your gap, you do not know where it is going, so you want to make sure that you are out of the market because you have no sense of direction after that point. So there's two ways to trade gaps. You either use pending orders and take profits to wait for the gap to come back up and close, or you can use instant execution, which means you are entering the market right here, right now, and you are basically going to set your take profit at more or less the same point, which is accommodating spread. Okay, so I think that is all for our gaps. Let's move on to the next lesson, but I hope you do well in your quiz.
Great, you've gone through the lesson. The most important part of this course is that you practice. Implement everything that you learned within this lesson. Make sure that you practice. No practicing, no reward. Let's get it.